Hello again. Welcome back. This is part 2 of my video for week 2 of our online class, U.S. History to 1877. Dr. D'Amico again. I talked for too long in the week 1 video, and the app I used to record the screen, which is called Screencast-O-Matic. I highly recommend it. Anyway, it only lets me record 15 minutes at a time before they want to charge me, and I'm not ready to commit to paying for it. So anyway, here we go. We were talking about, let's see, just to remind you and myself, we were talking about the colonial era, concepts, what happened, and interpretation. And so what I did in the last video was I talked a little bit about the week 2 assignments, and then I introduced some concepts that I'd like for you to know about that will help you with this class and with that Essay 1 assignment that's coming up. And so we did that. Now I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about what happened in the colonial era. So here, we did concepts. Now we did what happened is what we're about to do. And then that'll lead me back into a few comments about interpretation, which I think will help you with Essay 2. So, the colonial era. What happened? And so here's sort of just a basic overview of U.S. history to 1877, which is what our class is about. In the 7-week online version of this class, which you are taking with me, the colonial era encompasses weeks 1 and 2. So we're back here in the colonial era, the era before the American Revolution. In week 3, we'll get a little bit into the American Revolution. I know you're looking forward to it. Everybody loves the American Revolution, of course. 4th of July. Super fun, but also fun and interesting is the colonial era. So let's see, this weeks 1 and 2, we're in the colonial era, and here's just sort of a basic overview of what happened in the colonial era. So last week, you remember, I'm sure, we read a lot about Columbus, different interpretations of Columbus, and you read Howard Zinn's interpretation of all that, and of sort of some of the stuff that happened in American history in the 1500s and 1600s. So we sort of call that time period sometimes the period of early contact, and by that we mean contact between Europeans and Native Americans. We start to see some contact with African Americans as well. This is what we mean by contact, multicultural contact. This also is a period of conquest, when we see the early times in which the European colonists were going around conquering different parts of North America and actually South America and Central America, but this is a class about U.S. history, so we'll stick to North America as much as possible. So that's contact and early conquests from 1492 into the 1500s and 1600s. Then we start to see English colonization of North America. This is when the first enslaved Africans were brought to, again, what is now the United States of America. I wrote some dates down here, 1607, 1620, and just the 1600s generally. And what I'll do is I'll refer back to these dates in a couple minutes, but just to sort of remind you or say to you, this class is not about memorizing dates. Don't get too hung up on the memorization of dates. It's more important that you have a general sense of the order in which things occurred. So, okay, we're in the 1600s, early English colonization. Then the late 1600s, we start to see some turning points. So Zinn is talking about this sort of stuff in chapters 2 and 3. Some turning points in the 1600s. A lot of conflict between colonists So including a lot of sort of complicated imperial wars between French and English colonists. And they were fighting one another because France and England were fighting one another. Spain was in there too. Anyway, but back in Europe, they were fighting. The details don't matter. The important thing is that these people also fought one another in North America. Also, fair amount of conflict between colonists and Native Americans in different times and places. That then takes us into the 1700s. I wrote down commerce, more connections with the mother country, because sort of an interesting thing that happened in the 1700s is travel times increased. It got a lot faster to cross the Atlantic Ocean. And as that happened, what we start to see in really all the colonies in the Americas, North and South America, but I'll just say in North America, the British colonies, is that the colonies actually became a lot sort of more tied to the mother country, which is England in this case, economically, as the 1700s went on. Through commerce, through it's trade, right? Commerce. Then that sort of helps us lead into the French and Indian War, which happened from 1754 to 1763. And that's the American version of this global war that was happening all over the world, which we call the 7 Years' War. And then, so that is sort of what led right into the American Revolution. So that's just a little bit of a framework for you to help you understand chronologically what happened when. I have a few maps to show you. I always say in my classes, you know, if you don't like maps already, I think you have to like them. By the time you are finished with this class, you're gonna like maps. So this is our general overview, and what I have here, let's see, I have one map that's sort of about this first bullet point, going back to contact and early conquests. That's what we did in week 1. So here's just a world map. I imagine you've seen something like this at some point in your life. A world map that shows you some of the sort of earliest dates in which these European explorers were going around, sailing to different parts of the world, exploring, yes. Also doing some conquering, as you read about, for example, with your Columbus. He didn't literally just explore. He did some conquering too. He claimed these lands for Spain, for example. So an interesting thing to consider is the difference between the word explorer and the word conqueror. Those are similar words, not quite the same. So that's sort of what we were thinking about in week 1. So this is the 1400s, the 1500s. Again, the details of like who's doing what exactly, that's not really the point. The point is that this is sort of what set off this era of multinational competition, really, for all of the Americas. But this map's about North America. And I called the map Early English Colonization, Multinational Context, just to help you see that. So a lot of the times when we study American history, we're really focused up here. This is like the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving, and maybe we're focused down here with like Pocahontas and Jamestown and John Smith and all that. But this English colonization of North America happened in a multinational context. Really, the English were kind of only motivated to come here and try to plant colonies here because the Spanish had already been down in Latin America, and then they were kind of coming up from Mexico to plant colonies in what's now the American Southwest, and also into Florida. And also the French had been up here in Canada, and they were starting to come down and plant colonies along these waterways, the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River. So it's really important when we study American history to keep in mind that there are in fact other nations in the world besides the United States, and that the history of the United States is really very multinational. So that is the context for the first permanent English settlements in North America. One of which, actually the first one, was down in Virginia. There's Jamestown, founded 1607. You read all about, or will read all about that in Zen, chapter 2. And then up here, here's Plymouth, Massachusetts, 1620. Then 10 years later, Boston, founded in 1630. And that's that primary source document you're reading in week 2. John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. Okay, so that's the context for what we're doing in week 2. And I'll just say one more thing about the colonial era. That is that it's really important to keep this multinational competition situation in mind. So I wrote Imperial competition, transatlantic context. Transatlantic just means across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's really important to sort of think of colonial North America as part of this greater Atlantic world, which included the Caribbean, the coast of South America, the coast of Africa, and also Europe. All of these places were much more interconnected than we sometimes imagine today. This is the so-called triangle trade map. So in the triangle trade, what happened was the colonists were selling usually raw materials back to the mother country. And then the mother country was trading, in the mother country, they would take the raw materials and make finished goods out of them. So like take your beaver furs and make hats out of them, for example. Those finished goods, a lot of them would get sold back within Europe somewhere. A lot of them would get sold to the colonists, and a lot of them got traded in the African slave trading ports for slaves, who then were taken over into Latin America, into the Caribbean, and into North America, where they provided labor that would in turn help make more raw materials. That's your kind of triangle trade, which maybe you've heard of. The economic theory by which our European nations who were making these decisions about colonization and imperialism, the economic theory was called mercantilism. And so here's an official definition of mercantilism for you, but what I want you to understand about mercantilism is that this is why it was really the whole point of the colonies was to make money. Like sometimes we say, oh, the colonists came to North America for religious freedom or whatever. And they sort of, that's not necessarily not true, but equally and more true is the fact that they really needed to turn a profit. To make a colony work, you had to turn a profit. And I think if you understand that, it explains a lot about colonial history. And that brings me back around toward the sort of final theme for today, and that is interpretation, which is what I'm asking you to do in your Essay 1 assignment. So I've put some pieces of advice / questions on this slide for you to look at and think about as you go to write that Essay 1 assignment. Hopefully the assignments you've done in week 1 and especially also in week 2 will really help you have some food for thought to structure your essay around. So read the essay assignment, follow these pieces of advice, and never ever hesitate to contact me with any questions, concerns, anything like that. Okay, best of luck. Have a good week.